Hello, and welcome to the second installment of our reading series, Time Sensitive. My name is Becca Liu, and I co-organize this series with Ethan Plaue. Time Sensitive explores the time-making practices of poetry, performance, and multimedia art. The reading series will recur on a yearly basis, and hopefully in the following iteration, we can welcome everyone in person at the Kelly Writers House. Tonight, I have the pleasure of introducing the poet, scholar, and professor Tyrone Williams. Tonight's event will begin with a reading from Professor Williams, followed by a Q&A with the audience that Ethan and myself will moderate. Please submit questions to the Kelly Writers House staff through the chat on YouTube, and Ethan will read them out loud during the Q&A portion. Before I invite Tyrone to the Zoom podium, we wanted to express how fortunate we are to hear him read today. Tyrone transfigures the word, adding texture and torque to the poetic line that makes us reconsider what it means to live in language, in what we call English, in the multi-layered connotations and affects that are most palpable in scraps of language or quick shifts in tone. In Tyrone's lexicon, when we pick up a word or a line jostling with consonants, we speak what he calls in the poem Tao, quote, an ambient language. Words are boarded up by time, and when reading these poems, we hear unfolding inside them the long histories that only a subtle yet incisive wordplay can let loose. These are rigorous, dexterous, controlled, yet dizzyingly restless poems that betray a sharp wit whose sense of history is sharper yet. Tyrone Williams' language straddles the paradox of the hiddenness of words, their blurred and boarded up legacies, but also their distinctive and outstretched sociality that can take us unawares. And now to introduce Tyrone Williams. He teaches literature and theory at Xavier University in Cincinnati, Ohio. He is the author of several chapbooks and 6 books of poetry: CC, On Spec, The Hero Project of the Century, Adventures of Pi, Howl, and As Is. A limited edition art project, Plaue, was published by Hostel Books in 2017. He and Jeanne Hooving edited an anthology of critical essays, Inciting Poetics. His new website is www.flummoxedpoet.com. Please welcome Tyrone Williams.
Thanks, Becca. Thanks, Ethan, and everyone for inviting me here tonight. I'm going to read basically 3 poems, 2 poems of mine, and then I'll finish with an excerpt from a book that I collaborate with Pat Clifford. And that book is going to be published by Delete Press. I think we get our copies any day now, so it'll be coming out within a few weeks. It's called Wash Park, so I'll be reading an excerpt from that too. So 3 things tonight. The first is Abecedarian. It's in different parts, as you'll hear. A. Lo, fidelity emerges from a noise pounding the shore. Her sails belied by a low thrum, propellers, and so those hoisted veils lift and lid the eye, while lower boats go unseen, the steady splash of oars unheard. The infidel extends a hand, sticks out a tongue, sniffs no, and joins his brethren underwater. B. Gymnasium, long in the tooth, shrinks. Jim goes one-on-one against the health club, AKA athletic center. Up and down the court they go, a tower in Jordan's, Napoleon cliche, trading layups and trays until a monster dunk sends old knee-highs flying to the brink of irrelevance. Brushing off the glitter of shattered glass, rad Converses step up to the free throw line. Sinks one, rims the other. Clock runs down to stop. C. Hubris of the A game brought up from AAA, ergo I am. So kudos to the launch lizard, his ship in her big score, old saws for green apples. There's always a wizard, god, or bridge loan hauling someone's ass out of family court. Above each alt, an overpass, a vehicle, lights out, hurtles through a darkness bright as blood, twice taught, the invention of sirens for wax in the ears. D. Jew the verb was Greek to me, Little League and Latin club notwithstanding the grown-up who never learned to love or leave it sans declension. Caught colds, the flu, never Jew by the toe, sought refuge under cover but my skin, the leak, the fire next time some time ago, waterboarding soon to come. The ark a dream under construction while animals learn to speak. Kill 2 blacks with 1 Jew. E. K and J pop, but not the pop of indigo girls. Ellison's Blues, right, left to our own devices, is a free app in a black box. Flatline data, error messages. They take the rap and so do we, but everybody gets a pass to tap that asset. Drop futures and give us 40, adjusted for streaming screens. All in to front the kids. Adolescent perk, tween cop, toe the hill, a cap in your hat. I. Liability studies started by a coalition of unused, just so dried out brushes, cutting for celluloid crowd-style words, deleted emails, Negro conservatives, plastic bottles, Kurds, Mimeo sheets, Pluto the planet, Xerox and Xerox, landlines, newspapers, convicted policemen, unmarried uncles, fur wraps, cassette decks, USSR, styrofoam, dead wood, any president, premier, black leather pants, burning leaves. In middle management, stopgap angels trolling for the man, poring over cloud recordings of his TED Talks. Rumor has it he's been hoarding anti-devilment sanitizers, but no, he's clean. His mud flaps absorbing blowback. Still, his crew is moving him to a safe universe. They check the booby traps, turn out the lights, and hear hope spring, trip. Aura. Occidental Pierrettes spin a table into a tableau of judges holding tins above their heads, a show of hands that runs until the sunset of sunsets never sets as it gradually slows down to the crawl of a minuet, some minaret's first call. S. The tremor of pursed lips belies pure ventriloquism. He heard, not seen. A purse is big wallet, small cash, except when it's not. Prize money too large to call stuffed wallet. Doll and doll animus pair up under threat. Small fry, frying pan, and fire. Only one speaks, only one mouth moves. We can't read her their eye, talk, but for the fortunate mute. T. Queerdom came as hands were dealt. For example, 4 of a kind trumps 2 pairs of 2 colors, number or face. They can't take selfies, can't be simply tell to ask. Rubik cubes and slant tropes, puns and homonyms, pi disfigures telltale couples, shorts triangles, even as mores pursue more, C, D, E, J, K, M, etc. Held in reserve, new blues to the Greeks for a spell, tom boy foolery. U, STRESS, undercover syllables, sotto voce synthesis, snake their way through crawl spaces of the big house. The third policeman, last imam, hidden behind Wall Street, second coming, cast misspells, SCOTUS POTUS, in beats they cannot walk, stilted side to side shuffling, geometric right angle hypotenuse, dyslexias, girth angel hype, tenuous will you be minds, the underbellies of chalk outliers. V. Tattletales can't keep their traps shut, jaw jabbering to anyone within earshot, eye to batting eyes. I too was taken in by the lyric, coarse smiles, mere wows to make me sing, rat out my VPN of strokes and tropes. Packed account, business all in the street, nothing but naked poetry, a wild leer, and a hand placed discreetly between the lines of a panegyric. All that's left for me, cut bait both ways. Catch me if I can't. W. Upstream against the rapids, overturned kayak, oars, toothpicks. Strike a match, tallow candle with glass hoodie, or text Uber, the next yellow LED. Can you send a signal from Utah, but fuck oot? Life coach post jacket, taking on water while treading water, and yet becomes an underwhelmed, down another fistful of antacids if we're not back at work on Monday. X, ventriloquism of the, X, ventriloquism of the hand. Let fingers do the walking through these yellow legal pads. Vocals by machine, and the ghost haunts the body, that madcap accumulation, primitive and late. A strange land. I only simulate escape, lift one foot as if to step into orbit, fail safe the other. I cannot stand to raise a country I carry about. Why? Winter weekdays ends, intergenerational cold shoveled into a mouth without a tongue. Belated better not to be cold comfort. A little heat from wannabe diamonds, some weather from a pen pal, radio waves, books, sufficient today. Innocent of legal tender until driven out of bedroom and basement, washed down, scorched, clean of magic, Smith Corona Defender, disabled, open source bandage, click on speak. Z, X-rays and Xeroxes make one case for history, always on trial for treason. Invisible sleights of hand unfelt, self-slapped heads, X unknown, XXX, known unknown. Spontaneous welts sprout from limbs, torsos, e pluribus histories, plu histories, even as wounds chase parentage back to unum, an illuminated cave, or Ulipo game, X and Y axis, back and base, of uppercase, incomplete E, finished I. Zero. Yes closes a book. Yes, 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 books a room at the funny farm. Yonder then a stereo yawn spanned by draw suspension bridges. Wagers made, wages withdrawn, yo-yo bungee jumping over the sides. You might say, but I digress, speak volumes. Throw the book at, I build cliches. No pronoun alone yells louder than wind between. Address comes out fighting from his corner. 1. Zoom, metastasized Skype, no greater than or equal herd limited immunity, shot in the face of the crowd, voting with our logins for the right not to be seen or heard, face masks in lieu. We, the first recognition software, ambient house hype, bills to build a better Babel, pyramid scheme 2.0, A-frame ziggurats collapse beneath the weight of type, left and right speakers, mono stereo. This poem was published by Cumberland, so I'm grateful to Michael Cross for that. It's called Line 9. You, green containment half full, 3/5 not. Have, gloves, scarves, earmuffs, a ride to the show. Seen, a book talks out of the closet wearing someone sings. How, spared qualities inhale the black smoke of charred bonds. A, set to play the role of E, but union alphabet sets aside the sum of sets. Man, S1 equals pipeline for a crude future. ABP, the plus after S, drag to P. Was, invisible boys, erection days. Made, a tired X spells an exhausted Y. A, not existent first, orient a spectrum of frequencies. Slave, CD, etc. of reading. You, reader unhear. Shall, lower the bar of a pushover I, OX, O morrow. C, a queen for a kingdom come community center church neighborhood, blocks off the top. How, big two-hearted river wrestles itself to a notarized draw. A, there are, in fact, few only one primary letters. Slave, you don't get to own impoverishment, your own ethnic cuisine. Was, the tinny jingle of paper clips jostled about as pickpockets. Made, another woman arms disjointed chief mosaic staff splayed she will speak what remains never. Skin cells under fingernails, cuts, animal predation. A, pointy-headed ponytail ball, whoosh, astride, no. Man, CYAXWVUATSROPONAMIKAJIHAGFEDACBA. And I'm going to finish up with reading a selection from Wash Park, which is, again, this collaboration with Pat Clifford, coming out on Delete Press this spring. And the section I think I'm going to read from is called As the Operations Progress. As the operations progressed, he wanted unity of design, thin plot lines to crawl. When he was more relevant, collecting bits and springs, verification unlike any intending green. Wash era, how dare she, told the exhumed for the eradication of civil probable cause effects, repeatedly impaled, paired, one of the old bent bags, the bag's auspices paved, he would pick to tell a sort of synopsis, for the liners couldn't stop. An unable fall, her voice, I've already made final arrangements, pitch black Photoshop green signs, off on tax tab, he lets her hasset, chums up the help to fend rainy laws, stanchions of broader means. Such technique and memory, childish to tell so soon, neglected breathing to feel their contributions morph. Pre-meta is as always an outlander. Before there was land, scrub sterile guns, the operation washed out the many blues of contrived exposure, their use terribly fraught in escape gravity of inextant location. Now bystander observant, lull to unheard question, authorization up, flat grade count, downplay fortune, 5 the gang, 4 notorious, big 3C de Volvo, policing unseen between rhymes, blanket and grass, backing into the adequate, no loss dean, Kane and awkward mogul, not sleep, we pratfall, make betters of evidence, blurted decorum, doctor expectorant, wall off the defenseless in the door, stoops to reconquer, but swings away, swings toward another man, simply would not let go. Another loved one, nothing but muscle, fucking since the age of reason. If effacement could lay about brace hole, biblical radius, superfluous circumvention, outsourced margins called the future, where futures meet, what if? Recessional of the master's plan. This was the best parade one could imagine then, watching the marshal pass glitz grand and open talk hand into hand till nothing was visible, bonanza's shrewd drafts, memory bowed up. New paint jobs, reckless apparatus, a ding-along, dead car offices, passers-by nailed to the stones, crushed into pavement, clamped teeth light, upwell areas, a limited but real cast for characters, kidney bean, banana breast, our brakes broker, hookups abounding, public parenthesis as habitat journey, everything in a borrow, we didn't push, bronze tendencies shaped like vehicles, slots available for underground parking, dead parade eagles fly, Friday black versus v black palimpsest, floor wild trade up for up, and riches called feed raise limits, freed that we may sit, allowed to grow private on informal paths, being passed to final good impression, no salute line. And then I'll finish with innovation hypno. One, in the year he could hide no longer of his conviction, the Lord 3DC over the land prepared to meet his transients. A box with the head of a pyramid chanced to the rhythm of the bandana women walking in circles, dipping aluminum light but durable buckets into technically dry riverbeds of vintage choice. and pouring libations for much cement and gravel, should you mix with this sand into the various cavities of skeletons trampled underfoot into tablet walkways with a view of the crime downtown. Nobody seems to deal shrewdly with them. A building with its head blown off, and shall I call a nurse? A street tree uprooted and replanted as evidence of a judge delicate over us, even as the artificial flowers under weather deteriorated to delicate. 2. For this method acting to have any chance that is not the throw of a single die, he had contracted numerous admirers and friends of old Bill. This too, this process will of course, and there is no other, only work if the ground is perfectly flat. Gravel sites with a good separation between a body under an excavated bus and one beneath notice. Dramatic moments of the political renewal can be quite crowded. Whether it will stay that way or not, conflicted desires will be described first in Prospect Park in red, E of perverted forms. The land does not mind raising them to uplift civility. They are responsible for his honor conviction. 3. After the purchase acquittal of not his story stuffed into the mouths of babes and dudes as a watershed coon shelf, devolving into cutthroat megaliths, and after those are anointed, evaluated, and mapped as others, unraveling along the busiest thoroughfare, the slit that is always central renders moot all interrogation. Read, e.g., do you want to open this file already published and frail? Soon after the denouement of history, some come up who have never expired to possess more than land. They also come who need their number not clear if they get the 2x4 measures of approval. They want to show him their field cum desme, but only stand around, for he is the absentee lord as steward, as they are in custodial care. If it were up to their word to honor legacy, they fly to a place where they can choose will to clear it, truth will out. But their flight will have been investments tricked out as their sarcasm returns deferred to futures now even the sun knows when will explode. Not even our festivals have authority in that flung system. But if the West End's treatment, that infatuated sinners as fail, are what remains and remain moments of surrender called a margin. And for those quad that for which the world's space would have been terminates, the timid of soft shoulders finding softer byproducts more useful than as cum horsepower, worth only superfluous essence, for compost nay compare. Few such flywheels have worked their commemoration retain ne plus ultra cogs. In note that the Supreme Court can expense their records for the good expunge of the order. A commons displaced to translate unmarked moderns to be fixed as essentially pure winds, walk off annexation, ends first of severed war. Yonder, the site and inverse pyramid, yanks now too soon as a confederation of a book as of index, rigor vita fingers. Thank you.
Hi, we're back. I think Becca's going to be here. Yep. Thank you, Tyrone. Thank you so much for that reading. That was really great. Yeah, so I want to encourage viewers to submit questions on your YouTube chat, and I'll read them out loud. We got a few already, so I'll read those. But I think before that, just to give some more people more time to ask questions, Becca and I prepared a few, and we'll start with those, and then we'll get to the Q&A. So my first question was that our series is premised on the idea that time works differently in poetry than in other literary arts. This could have something to do with sound, with rhythm, with the visuality of the page. What do you feel time does for your writing? Or how do you make time in your poetry? How does your poetry use time as another element? Another way of putting this is, how might time be represented or experienced in your work?
Well, that's a good question. So let me start with the last poem, or the excerpt, I should say, that I read from the last work, this collaboration with Pat Clifford. So in that work, we're deliberately collapsing time in order to mimic what we see as essentially, late capitalism, the way in which the future and the past sort of collapse into an ever expanding present. For us, that's essentially the nature of gentrification, which is one of the themes of this particular work that we're working on, which is about a park in between the business district of downtown Cincinnati and a fairly poor community called Over the Rhine in Cincinnati. And so this park was gentrified starting in, I guess, around 2004. And so one of the things that we did was sort of walk around the park at various times, and Pat took pictures of the park as it was going through this development. One of the things that happened was that the discovery of an underground cemetery beneath the park, which was paved over for a parking lot. And so for us, that became emblematic then of the way in which in neoliberal capitalism, time collapses into this, as I said, ever expanding present. So one of the things we tried to do in that poem was, again, mimic that sense of really of no time, which is to say a present that's ever expanding. In my own individual work, I've been very much concerned with the question of the way in which time is, well, let me be more specific, the future and the past get erased in order to raise up, as it were, an ever expanding present. So for me, shifting in verb tenses, playing with letters and words, this all becomes a way of interrogating our notion of the present.
Thank you. Becca, do you have a question?
Yeah, great. Thank you, Tyrone, so much for that reading and also just that really thought-provoking response just now about time. I was going to ask about history, but I think like how history and maybe sort of archival practices work in your poetry, but actually kind of hearing you speak just now about sort of thinking about gentrification and sort of neoliberal practices, or what happens to time maybe under neoliberalism. I'm wondering if you could actually talk a little bit more about critical theory and continental philosophy and how these like critical praxis might inform your poetry, or earlier when you were mentioning teaching a philosophy and public sphere course, if you could talk kind of broadly about what you're teaching and sort of general reading of critical theory and philosophy, how that informs your poetry, or maybe vice versa.
Okay. Well, in terms of teaching, I mean, it's true that I, got a great deal of training in grad school in continental theory. I happened to be in the right place in the right time when all that was fairly new. But it definitely had influenced my sense of politics above all else, in terms of what was possible in the wake, and particularly in the wake in Detroit of the Black Arts Movement, and the way the different forms that would continue to take, particularly in Detroit, but also not take in other parts of the country, at least not visibly in terms of what I could see. And so what that meant for me then was interrogation above all, and the interrogation of the most commonsensical things that we take for granted in my own work. And that's certainly something I try to bring to bear in teaching, which can be difficult, to interrogate the things that are taken most for granted, as it were. In fact, right before this reading, I was talking with a colleague about even our concept of life, how limited that is in terms of what we imagine to be life, or to be sentience, and the way we sort of constrain what that means, are constrained by our own parameters of knowledge. And so another way of saying this is that nothing is off the table in terms of what I write about and what I teach, because the one thing I don't want to, the one thing I try to avoid is taking almost anything for granted, in both in my poetry and in my teaching. So for me, poetry is simply another synonym for interrogation of the everyday, of the commonsensical, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. We were worried that we weren't going to get a very active chat, and looks like we have. So we have some questions lined up from the audience. The first one I'll ask, because it kind of goes back to your first response about gentrification in Cincinnati. This is a question from Benjamin. Can you talk about the influence of Cincinnati, if any, on your writing and thinking?
Well, so for a long time, I didn't acknowledge any influence because I wasn't exactly, I found myself sort of resistant to what I imagined Cincinnati to be. It seemed to be, from my point of view, when I first arrived in the city, a backward place, coming from Detroit, and culturally backward, that is. And so for a long time I didn't, but then what I realized was that my writing was in some ways a response to the city, to Cincinnati. And then I found, of course, other people who felt the same way over the years, including Pat Clifford, my collaborator on the Wash Park book. And so Cincinnati but this is also true for Detroit now, because living in Cincinnati allowed me to sort of take off the somewhat rose-tinted way I saw Detroit, from a distance. I could see some of the weaknesses and even some of the similarities between Detroit and Cincinnati, which for many years I did not want to acknowledge that there were similarities, since Detroit's my hometown and so forth. So what that meant for me then was, in fact, I was just writing about this, is that my Detroit and my Cincinnati are very small parts of each of those cities, that the rest of those cities have much more in common than, in terms of being Midwestern cities, tending to be fairly conservative, politically, and to a large extent for me, the conservatism of Detroit was sort of blocked because I was hanging around the Wayne State area, which is a very, at least at that time, was a very sort of progressive, politically, culturally area. A lot of avant-garde music and art was there. And so, I had this, again, a kind of, rosy picture of Detroit in that way. And Cincinnati, which I saw, the opposite, is a very negative space. I now, see the possibilities and have met people who also see possibilities other than what seems to be apparent in this sort of conservative face that it presents to the rest of the country, if that makes sense.
This is a question. I wish they wish they could respond then, but it makes sense to me.
Okay.
This is a question from Andre. What is it like to work on a collaborative project between a poet and a scholar, like in Wash Park?
So I've actually always enjoyed collaboration. I've worked in Cincinnati. I've worked on a public park space dedicated to Black soldiers, the Black Brigade, as they're called. And that was a collaborative project with the Cincinnati Park and Recreations Group. And I really enjoyed that. And I think it goes back to my desire early on. I wanted to be a songwriter. Specifically, I wanted to be a songwriting lyricist. And so I worked with a lot of different musicians, when I was in my teens and early 20s. And so I always enjoyed that collaborative space. Working with Pat was easy because we had a routine. We wrote parts of the book separately and we wrote parts of the book together. And there was no ego involved, as far as I can tell, either our parts. We both were willing to change and to alter the text for the greater, for the sake of the greater project. So I love collaboration. This is the first time I've done it in poetry, but I definitely would not look away from doing it, again.
This is a question from Jayla. What does the constant sectioning, partitioning of your poems mean to you? It feels like you use them to create scenes, but do you think of them differently?
I'm not particularly creating or thinking about them in terms of scenes, but I am thinking about them in terms of what would be the word? Well, formal constructs. Like the first poem, Abecedarian, which is sort of a poem built around the Abecedarian form, except I've sort of enlarged it to include poems standing in for individual lines. So it's very formal, it's very procedural, that first poem. It's so so is the second poem too, which is based on a famous line from Frederick Douglass's autobiography. So I've always been interested in formal procedures, in terms of my poetry. And so that sort of guides the creation of these partitions or sections in this work. That was also true in my book, How, from 2011, which is, it's a big book, but it's absolutely, written to form, to a particular form that I was following in that particular work. So for me, it's driven by formal concerns always.
And this is a question from Andrew. Thank you for your beautiful reading, Professor Williams. I would be interested in hearing your thoughts about the role of process and ephemerality in your writings. Do you think there is an excess or a twist or any unintentional effect produced by your use of wordplay, permutation, and distortion?
Well, first of all, I absolutely agree that despite my use of, particular formal and procedural methods, you can't control everything. You certainly can't control meaning. And I've experienced that in various contexts, reading books, reading poems from my books. One, I can give you one example of this. I read, I was invited to Buffalo several years ago after How came out by Michael Keller. And in that context, I was reading at different places at the bookstore up there, but I also read at Buffalo State College, which is a community college, basically. And so the people who came to the reading were older adults, they were not 18 to 22-year-olds. And they were almost to a person, African-American. So it was the first time I read this very difficult book to a largely Black audience. And I was really worried about how it would come off, and so forth. But I started reading and they were howling in the aisles. I said they were laughing. They were getting all which I had forgotten about, the jokes and humors that had been embedded and so forth. And they were just, it was hilarious. So it was one of the reasons I remember that is because it reminded me that you never know what to expect. You can't predict in advance how any particular audience is going to react to your work. You may have your own presuppositions about what you think will and will not work for a particular audience, but that experience taught me that no, you really can't predict that at all, because I was reading this very difficult, complex work, and it was almost like being in church. They were just howling, they were sort of shouting back to me, and yeah, it was great. It was great.
Great. I think we have one last question, or maybe we'll say this is the last one because it's a good question that kind of wraps us up for
Okay.
some of our concerns with time. This question is looks like it's in two parts. Could you maybe say something about the economic concept of primitive accumulation and whether it factors into your thinking when making this sort of interrogative and in some sense materialist work? I think this thing back to your first response. If capital strives for timelessness or an erasure of the marks of time by draining natural resources, for example, do you think that of your work as inscribing time in some way?
So taking the last part of that question, excellent question. I try to think of my work to a certain extent as not necessarily, I mean, I don't know about describing time, but certainly trying to foreground temporality in the work, in terms of the movement, the shifts. So I'm definitely trying to do that. Um, and that comes from my critical practice, my critical training, is to be wary of, even aware of the word time, because it's like the word present. It seems to just erase everything else. And so I'm much more interested in spacing and temporality in the work. And yes, primitive accumulation has become it's unfortunate. I think it's shown up maybe too much in some of my recent writing, because it's a way to think of not just of economic and political structures per se, but also to think of how one, like in the first poem in the in Abecedarian, there's a part where I'm talking about that in terms of personal growth, that we, on the personal level, there's a kind of primitive accumulation that we get that we don't know about, which is to say when you're an infant and you're being structured and socialized in ways that you don't even realize. And I think of that as a kind of, psychological, if you will, equivalent to a primitive accumulation. And the connection, of course, is for someone like me growing up in the United States, is that the two things dovetail at a certain point. And that's when you get this notion of common sense, that things that cannot be questioned because you have been built to accept the parameters that have been literally, that you've internalized over a number of years. And so I think of that term as applying across the board, not just to the economic or political or even cultural and social structures, but again, even to our psychological structures that we unwittingly, take in.
Thank you. I mean, that looks like it's the last question from our chat, but thank you very much for those really engaging and wonderful, very full answers to our questions, and for that great reading. I look forward to reading your next work from Delete Press as well.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you for inviting me again.
Yeah. Hope to talk to you soon, see everybody in Kelly Ryder's house and hear your applause in person and everything like that. All right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Becca.